when you open the door for somebody else.
Welcome into the vaccine conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob for another live. It was supposed to be an Instagram and Facebook Live
at
show.
7:30.
And they found us and literally are like blocking all Wi-Fi signals from our house. So
they shut us down.
Yeah, so we are on YouTube Live. Thanks, YouTube
We've
Live.
never done this before, so I don't know how it works, and that's not our fault.
Right. But you guys found us, so glad you guys found us. And
what's so funny, we switched shirts this time.
I know.
So I had censored on last time. You have that on now. I have the podcast, not to show everybody my chest, but podcast tour shirt happening, but it's too cold in here to wear it by itself.
We are 3 more days into my my quarantine beard.
3 more days into mine.
Yeah.
Hey, anybody over 40 knows what I'm talking about. Just
you're not kidding. Yeah, you're not
Stop
kidding.
it.
All right. Anyway,
it's called Peach Fuzz.
So, well, let's jump in.
Yes. Okay. So I just want to really fast say that we did 2 days ago a first video. I don't even know where I'm supposed to be looking.
So right there's the camera.
Yeah, but then there's that one.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to look right in between and hope I don't look like I'm staring in space.
So this camera's there.
Okay.
Is it? No, this camera's over there.
Wow, you should have looked at the other way.
I should have. Yeah, anyway.
You can do it now. You can just spin it around, can't you?
Oh, yeah. Cool.
So we did a okay, good. So
but now I stopped it.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. That's okay because there's stuff done.
Okay.
So we did a video a couple days ago that has a lot of introductory stuff as it relates to the coronavirus pandemic and the panic and everything that's going along with it. So it's on my Facebook page at Melissa Floyd, and I will keep putting some video clips together. I guess we have to talk louder. I remembered that from the video.
Do we have to talk louder, you guys? Okay.
And so anyway, we're going to get right into about 4 or 5 studies today, studies and articles and whatnot. So we're not going to do any introductory stuff. So if you've missed all that, go back and check it because we're not doing it this time.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to get right into it, starting with the first article that was really, really interesting. And do you have the title?
I don't have
Okay.
the
So
title.
I'll get the title.
Oh, no, it is. It is.
Oh, you wrote on there.
Well, it's part of the title. It's a fiasco in the making.
Yes, a fiasco in the making. This is about making decisions without reliable data. And this article was written by, I'm going to pronounce his name, John Ioannidis.
Okay,
Make him special. It's probably not at all.
Sounds Greek.
It sounds totally wrong,
right.
but Ioannidis.
Yeah. Well, why that's important is as you're reading all these articles, you want to make sure you're reading something from a credible source, something from someone who knows what they're talking about and should be weighing in or has their credentials to weigh in. And John Ioannidis is a professor of medicine, of epidemiology and population health, and of biomedical data science and statistics at Stanford University. And he's the co-director of Stanford's Meta Research Innovation Center. So for this kind of topic, it doesn't get, you don't get really any better credentials than that.
Correct. So I came across this article and I thought this was literally the best thing I had read on this topic, maybe 3 or 4 days ago. I thought it really summarized a lot of the things that I had been discussing with other people and we had been talking about. So we'll go through it with you and we'll put the links to these in our podcast description. Right. And by the way, times are hard and so I had to cut my own bangs today. So
yeah, you can't tell.
Okay. So no shaming, please. No bang shaming. No bang judgment. Not at this time. Things are hard enough. So if you see things like a little bit off, it's not totally my fault. Like I'm not trained for this. Okay. So
and that's tough because your bangs, that's how you bring in a paycheck, at your house. So.
Oh yeah, my huge paycheck that I have because this is so lucrative.
No, I'm in the same boat. If you saw us a few days ago, I was kind of shaggy because I couldn't go to the haircut place for like many days. And so Cheryl and I, we broke down and she cut my hair last night. And it was kind of fun. It was like being back in college when your girlfriend would cut your hair, your girlfriend who's now your wife. And so it's not that bad.
Wait, do people do that in college? I never started cutting my hair.
No, she totally cut my hair for all the first years of our marriage. And my
gosh.
Yeah, well, you're poor and just out of college and medical school and you got to do what you got to do. So that's where we are again. It's kind of fun.
Hey, quarantine life.
We had fun doing it. You can't tell, huh? I think I don't know.
I didn't want to say anything. So, okay.
Anyway,
into the article. Yeah. So interesting. So
science and stuff.
Right? Science and stuff. So I'm going to start off with one of the first things that I liked, which he says, these are his exact quotes. He said, short-term extreme social distancing and lockdowns may be bearable. How long, though, should measures like these be continued if the pandemic churns across the globe unabated? How can policymakers tell if they're doing more good than harm? And we've heard the president talk about the same thing. The cure cannot be worse than the problem. And this idea about doing more harm than good. What if... everybody's like, it's just 2 weeks. And can I just say, I'm really irritated by all of the people I see online saying, watch Netflix, cook some meals with your family. It's just 2 weeks, like it's a vacation. People don't understand the kind of devastation that's happening as a result of this, even in 1 week, you guys. Like for some people, I have heard stories, people have messaged me, friends I have, in 1 week, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their business, and it's not going to reopen again. It's not like it's just 14 days, get over it. If people don't understand how businesses and small businesses work, then they don't understand why people are so up in arms about this. This is not a vacation. It's not like we're in the cabin hanging out for 2 weeks with our families. What's the big deal? Don't you want to save a life? It's just not that simple. And so that's why some of these people are having these deeper discussions about, of course, they want to save lives.
Right. But I think the reality is we are in these 2 weeks. That's
we
the
are
reality.
now.
Yeah. And so.
But the issue is about how long those 2 weeks really last, because there is no end date.
Right. But I think that's what everyone's pushing for now is let's get out of these 2 weeks as fast as possible.
But even President Trump said he's not giving a date.
I know.
So it's already
He's
been.
looking at Easter. Possibly,
right. It's been 9 days, but we have our own governor for our state who is making, there's LA County has a lockdown in place until the middle to end of April. So that's already more than 14 days. Yeah. If you can't go to your work because you're not an essential business, then how are you paying your bills? They're not going to cover your bills for several months. It's just not going to work that way.
Right.
So I think if it was 14 days, we could have all been like, okay, there's an end date to this. But what it sounds like they're doing to me is a couple of weeks and then we'll reassess. Yeah. And then that reassessment turns into now your state's doing a month. That's extra time. And pretty soon it's going to be, it's the Easter holiday. And after that, let's just keep kids out of school till June, and then it's summer. Yeah, this turns into lots of months.
Yeah, and then that's always been my biggest fear is our government going to go way overboard and turn this into many months of lockdown, or even maybe equally worse. I think these lockdown decisions are really up to the state governments. Right. And then we might have, the federal government say, President Trump might say, okay, everyone open up again. We've now realized that we don't have to have this long lockdown and we flatten the curve. And so everyone can move on with their lives. But what if some states don't? And I kind of worry.
I'm worried about California.
We live in kind of one of the worst states for this kind of scenario. Right. And I envision our governor possibly keeping the lockdown going, and this becomes more and more financially devastating. And that's what this article really says. The consequences of long-term lockdowns, they are entirely unknown, and the consequences could be very dire economically, which will translate into health consequences.
Right. So he's saying, hey, this short-term thing, that could be bearable. But how long can this go on? And what if it's long-term? And if it's long-term, we don't even know what's going to happen. So what was the next thing that you liked on this? Well,
I like how he uses an example of the Diamond Princess cruise ship, and where we learn, how necessary is a total lockdown, and what was the result when they had a closed space to kind of research this. And
700 passengers.
Right, and they said basically the one situation and the only situation we have so far to study where there was a closed lockdown was the Diamond Princess. The case fatality rate there was 1%.
7 people out of 700.
Right, so 700 people caught it.
Right, and 7 fatalities.
Okay. So he expands more on it here. I'll go over this because this is kind of like, I found this very, very interesting. There's largely an elderly population, all right? And there were just 7 deaths among the 700 infected passengers and crew. I wonder how big the crew was. like how many, were on the ship. There were thousands on the ship, but out of everyone on the ship, it's not like everyone caught it. Only 700 caught it. There were 7 deaths, so 1% fatality. So he kind of sort of uses the numbers to extrapolate, what would that look like in the huge, like in the U.S. population if we had like a closed system. And this is a numbers guy, so he extrapolates to the entire nation and says reasonable estimates for case fatality rate, if this were to infect the U.S. population, would be somewhere between 0.05%, which is about 1 in 2,000 people, or up to 1%, which is 1 in 100 people. That would be the fatality rate we would expect, learning from the Diamond Princess cruise ship. But again, that was early. That was out without some of the known treatments we have now. Known treatments like IV vitamin C or chloroquine, or a combination of chloroquine and azithromycin. This was the fatality rate before we came up with some possible treatments for this.
And from what I read, I think now I'm remembering, 20% of the passengers were infected. Okay. That was 20%. Okay. So even in a contained environment, you think this would be 100% of people getting it. Even in that environment, only 20% got it. And that 20% amounted to the 700 that were infected. Out of the 700 that were infected, again, this is a largely elderly population already. And that's what he's saying is you don't know whether, because it's more elderly, then the 7 that died is even higher than what would have happened in the general population. There's no way to really know that, but this is the only contained environment that you can really use to kind of estimate how out of control that particular virus was. But the same thing happened in China in the exposed populations. They were saying only 3% of people actually caught it, just in the world, meaning not their entire country, but like in the areas that were exposed, only about 3% of people caught it. Out of the 3%, then you have only small amounts that are, having the severe cases. I think people are right now thinking that if it's in your county, it's everywhere at every street corner. And if you walk outside, you're going to get it.
And it's not.
But even if you're walking amongst people who have it in the regular busy public situation, only about 3 to 5% would likely catch it, even in a regular outdoor, or indoor environment.
Right. And then if they're looking at, a case fatality rate of 1% or even less, 0.5% or even as low as 0.05%, he makes the point that we have had other respiratory viruses, including a variety of other coronaviruses, that have had case fatality rates as high as 8% when they infect elderly people in nursing homes. And in fact, he says that there are a whole variety of mild, quotes, coronaviruses that infect tens of millions of people every single year. And they account for about 5 to 10% of those hospitalized in the United States with lower respiratory tract infections each winter. And this has already been happening for many, 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 many decades. This whole family of mild coronaviruses before this virus has been implicated in several thousand deaths every single year worldwide. Okay, several thousand.
To clarify, this is not COVID-19.
Right. This is all the other coronaviruses.
There's a family of coronaviruses that have existed long before that included things like SARS, included things like the common cold and all the different strains. And so you'll see some studies coming up now where somebody tested positive 3 years ago for coronavirus, but that is part of the coronavirus family. It doesn't mean it's COVID-19. Right. And so they're responsible for the rhinoviruses and different types of respiratory infections that people get that can lead to death. And so he's using those numbers, to say basically 8%. We've had 8% fatality rates before from other members of this family that are not COVID-19. Right. And right now we're looking at 0.05% up to 1%, which is still, people might think those numbers are high because every time they hear 1%, they take that and apply it to our entire population. Yeah. But just like I told you, it would be maybe about 3% of our entire population would even be exposed to it. And then out of that percentage, it would be the 0.05 or up to the 1% that could have fatality. But one of the things I think, before moving on further, that was really interesting, and I did a quick little graphic meme about this, but he is one of the first people that really took the time to talk about how we need to have a representative random sample of the general population to understand, again, what our denominator number is so we can calculate accurate fatality rates. Right now, all we know is who was sick, who the severe cases were. We don't know the hundreds of thousands of people, maybe in the millions of people that have had mild cases of this already, so that we could accurately calculate. So what he says is, he says, quote, reported case fatality rates cause horror and are meaningless. Right. Patients who have been tested for SARS-CoV-2, which is, the technical name, are disproportionately those with severe symptoms and bad outcomes. As most health systems have limited testing capacity, the selection bias may be even worse. And he said there is not a single country that has reliable data on the prevalence of the virus in the random sample of the general population. I just keep hearing this over and over and over. People don't seem to understand this concept. You cannot divide the number of deaths by the number of reported cases to get an accurate mortality ratio. Right. You have to know and have to have an idea, just like with influenza. They estimate about 50 million cases a year in the United States. So when they do their mortality data, they're taking the number of estimated deaths, which they estimate this season 20,000 to 50,000. And I think that makes up influenza and other respiratory viruses that cause pneumonia. They're taking that number and they're dividing it by 50 million, which is what gives you your very low 0.1% mortality rate for influenza. And what people are not doing as it relates to this is they're not using that same logic. They're taking the, 500 deaths or whatever it is and dividing it by the case totals in the United States. And they're saying, oh my God, look at these fatality ratios. And then they're taking that number and applying it to our entire population. And they're waiting for 1 million people to die. And that's why they're yelling at the president saying we need a national lockdown. It needs to be stricter. We need to do this longer. People in the conference today and yesterday, the media were actually saying it's too soon. If you open the doors, it's going to be too soon. And we've had this 14 days of economic collapse, and they're saying it's going to be too soon because they're using numbers that are inaccurate, and they are thinking it's Armageddon. Like literally there's going to be this, entire devastation of people dying left and right because if you walk outside your door, you're going to catch it. And if you catch it, you're going to die from it. This is the narrative that we're being told. People are so scared. Right. They're so scared. And I don't really blame people for being scared. I mean, you turn on the media, and if that's what you hear, that's what you're going to think. But this is very complicated, and there's a lot of data. And I have just come across video after article with these experts from all over the world that are law professors, educational professors, medical doctors, specialists with respiratory conditions, scientific advisors. We've looked at all these different people, and they're all very educated, and this is their career. They've been in this for a long time, so I trust their opinions. And so many are saying the same things that we are saying. So if you happen to jump onto this feed because somebody told you to watch it and you disagree with us, you think we're not taking it seriously. I saw somebody's comment that was like, I hope Melissa Floyd sees this. I like her and Dr. Bob, but I think they're getting it wrong on this issue because she's buying into the fear narrative that's also being given. But I just don't think that tells the entire story, much like the vaccine debate. And so you have to understand, we're doing our due diligence. Like we're literally looking through so much content. It's not like we're just coming up with our own opinions. This is like other experts that do this for a living and just taking all that information and saying, okay, let's paint the picture of what seems plausible or likely, or where do I have questions, or what doesn't sit right with me. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that you guys that are even maybe on the fence of this can still appreciate the fact that we're bringing you expert information and we're trying to break it down and digest it, but it might not be the popular opinion and it might not be what you hear on the media. That's not to say it's false, and it's not to say we don't care about people that are injured or could be injured by something like this. So this is just another side of things, but these people have great information and great statistics, and they're talking about all the same things that we are and that we have previously.
Yeah, this Stanford professor says locking down the world may be totally irrational. And again, I think that initial lockdown really was because it was so unfamiliar. There's so much mystery and secrecy out of China. We didn't know what to do, so everyone just overreacted and locked everything down. And I guess, again, what I see, most people now seem to be coming back from that and saying, no, this whole lockdown is not necessary. I mean, something I've seen our local hospitals and hospitals statewide doing when I'm getting emails from all the medical organizations that I'm part of, they're all basically saying all the hospitals are trying to prepare to take care of all the severely sick people. Everyone who does come down with that severe respiratory infection and needs to be in an ICU,
whether it's COVID-19 or something
or anything,
else,
right? Needs to be on a ventilator. They're basically expecting we might have a worse season now because COVID is adding on to the already number of infections that we're dealing with. So they don't want to be unprepared for that. And that's what I see all the hospitals doing. They're getting staff, they're getting equipment, they're converting, like operating rooms into ICU beds. They're expanding their bed capacity. They're basically trying to get ready so that as COVID goes through our country, because it inevitably will, and as the very tiny minority, percentage of our population does become severely ill, the hospitals won't be overrun. And we'll be able to, be prepared for this so that we don't have a high case fatality rate. But I feel like everyone seems to realize that we can't stop it. It's going to go through the population. It's going to be harmless for almost everybody. I think everyone seems to agree it is going to be mild and harmless for the vast majority. Let's be ready to treat the elderly when they're severely sick. Let's get prepared. So that's where I see all this preparation is going on. Is the hospitals want to be a place that can be ready to withstand this, this outbreak. But I feel like as people agree with that, and the federal government's trying to make sure everyone's supplied with everything they need for that, everyone is also agreeing the rest of the country should be able to go on with life as normal. We should be able to, if you're going to practice social distancing, you're going to maybe quarantine the elderly, the rest of us who are healthy should be able to go back to our jobs, get the economy going as soon as possible, as our medical system, gears up, to treat everyone who's really sick. And that's kind of what I'm hoping that everyone's going to come away with, as soon as possible. It's not like, I feel like we do need to realize the hospitals have to get ready to possibly, care for a much higher number of severely ill people from a respiratory standpoint. Because if that does happen, and if it happens worse than we expect and we're not prepared, then a lot of people will be in a lot of trouble. But I totally agree with you that the whole rest of us, our country, we should just get back to life as normal.
Well, so two things on that too. I was looking up the data for influenza for last year, 2018, 2019, and I was looking in California. And what a lot of people don't realize is there was a second, almost as large as the first peak in March. So this is the time of year last year. That wasn't the case 2 years ago. Right. But last year, there was a very sizable peak for influenza in March. So a lot of what we're seeing, remember, we've got 90+% of people going in to get tested are not positive for coronavirus 19 or COVID-19. Which means they're positive for something else. And that something else could be influenza, it could be something else. They could still need a respirator. They could still need assistance. They could still need that from a complication from that. Everybody's falsely thinking that if you're going to the hospital and needing help, then you've got this new coronavirus and it's so deadly these hospitals are packed.
Right, whereas the majority don't have the coronavirus.
The vast majority, they're like extremely high percents. And the second thing I want to say is I've had a lot of people that work in hospitals contacting me saying their hospitals are empty. So there may be these cases of certain cities where we've got the hospitals being overwhelmed, but there are also a lot of people where they said the nurses they're overpacked and they're actually encouraging them to take paid leave. That there are people sitting around with completely empty beds, floors with empty beds. That the picture that they're painting about hospitals being overburdened is not necessarily the reality. Yeah,
it's not the reality, especially yet. Yeah, and I think people are worried. I guess if coronavirus has been here for 3 months already, then you're right. There might not be this huge influx of severely ill people. I think people they're just trying to prepare for the worst and hope for something better than that.
Sure, but I mean, just like realistically, how likely is it that it just got here just now?
Right. I think people are. It's unlikely. Right.
I mean, it's very unlikely, which means it's probably been here, and there's not going to necessarily be some huge flood, except all the people that are flooding the hospital that have these mild cases of things that are not coronavirus. And they're taking away the manpower and the supplies and the things by needing to be checked for something that they're being sent home and told to just be home. In fact, the former head of the CDC was on a video that I was watching today, and he was saying when people show up to the hospitals, even if you're positive, they're going to tell you to go home and get better. So they're not going to take you and admit you unless you're having severe respiratory distress. So people are showing up by the flocks to the hospitals and they're negative. So then they're sent home. People are showing up, even the ones that are positive are sent home. So the hospitals aren't overrun with people from coronavirus that are having these mild cases, which is the majority. They're only going to be overburdened if they have the wrong people showing up, which is clogging their system, or if people have very severe cases. And we know for a fact that severe cases are so minimal, I don't really know how they could be overburdened in every major city across our country. I don't think it's going to turn out like that.
And I hope you're right. I hope they're not overburdened. But you know, I guess everyone just wants to be prepared. They don't want to have all these sick people that need an ICU bed and it's not there.
But like you're saying, be prepared, but that doesn't mean send everybody home to not be at work.
I know, you're right.
I mean, we can be, just like President Trump was saying, we can do two things at once. We can be prepared. We can work on helping, build capacity at these hospitals that we have problems with. We can target certain areas, but that doesn't mean everything has to shut down. What we are seeing right now, to me, doesn't warrant the kind of action that they're taking. And I think most people are agreeing with that.
And most states are not taking that severe lockdown action.
I forget that not everybody is like in this situation, because we are, and some people are talking about restaurants being open and things. Like that. I almost can't rember what that was
going
like.
To the restaurant.
I mean, which is not like the thing I'm missing. It's just the fact that being out and about is happening still in other places.
But I think, when this is all over, the Stanford professor, he already talks about how every year mild coronaviruses already tragically kill several thousand people every year worldwide. That already happens. And we've already had a few thousand or several thousand die from this strain of coronavirus. He points out that every year in our whole country, in a whole world, about 60 million people die from a whole variety of causes. That's the number he has, 60 million deaths from a whole variety of causes. Respiratory viruses don't even kill a million people. They don't even kill 100,000 people. They just kill several thousand people every year. Compare that to the 60 million that pass away every year from all causes. That's like a tiny little drop in the bucket. He says it basically, the people that are going to die from this virus tragically are basically going to be lost as noise among the 60 million people that are going to die worldwide this year.
Well, and specifically how he breaks it down is he said, worst case scenario. Let's say worst case, somewhere in the middle, we have this mortality rate that affects the entire population. He said it would translate to about 10,000 deaths. He said on any given year, we know that respiratory viruses are killing 20 to 50,000. So here's the thing. I hear a lot of people go, well, you can't believe the CDC numbers about flu deaths. And this isn't about the flu. I think the numbers that the CDC give as it relates to pneumonia complications and influenza basically are like the family of respiratory viruses. So I believe those numbers are accurate. They're just not all influenza. And because we know, and he mentions in this article, only about 20% of lab cases this year have been positive for influenza. That means 80% of them are not. But these are people who are sick enough to be seeking a test at an urgent care or at the ER or their doctor's office to order a test because they are sick enough. And so 80% of those who are sick enough with severe symptoms, who think it's flu, not just like sniffles, are not even positive for the flu. And so we've got 80% that are not positive, just like, we're seeing the same thing with coronavirus. But he's saying 20 to 50,000 we know are in fact 100% dying of respiratory illnesses every single year. And I want you to know that includes children, it includes people in their teens, it includes people in their early 20s, their 30s, their 40s, and their 50s. It's not just the elderly. What I find so interesting about COVID-19 and its sister virus SARS is that it is not really getting at all. Fatalities are not getting to people under 50. Very rarely between 40 and 50, and almost nothing under that. I've never seen a virus like this, because even measles, we know, can kill children, rarely, but it does. This is such an odd virus that it basically targets mostly those over 60, especially over 70 and over 80. And so we know for a fact children and young people die every single year in the several hundreds of respiratory illness. We know that for a fact. So we're not seeing that at all. And we're still seeing this crazy panic because of the fear of death. But he's saying worst case scenario, it would be 10,000 deaths. That is still 1/5, 1/2 to 1/5 of what we see every single year by from respiratory illnesses.
Yeah, what's interesting is every year in the United States, we have about 100 children die from the flu. Influenza, confirmed influenza, about 100. Yet in China, they only have one confirmed child die from COVID-19.
Who's 14, and we don't know if he had
which is a very interesting discrepancy, and it just, again, it speaks to the fact that we don't have to worry about our children.
But so the worst case, it's kind of good to know worst case scenario, I think, because he's saying that's worst case scenario is 10,000 deaths. Best case scenario, it's far less than that. The point is, this is happening every year, and nobody even stopped to think about it.
Right.
Nobody stopped to think about social distancing. Nobody stopped to think about taking the world off of their entire economic trajectory and stopping everything to save those handful of lives. I don't really understand, and I feel a lot of people feel the same way, why this took such a different turn. And obviously the more information as the weeks come in, we're going to look at how to deal with this, differently in the future.
Yeah. But he stresses, again, the Stanford professor stresses that we are not going to see an exponential increase in fatalities.
Right.
As the rates of this kind of follow a bell curve, and they go up exponentially initially, it's going to flatten, it's going to go down. We're not going to see, what we're up to about, 450 deaths in the U.S. so far.
I didn't check today, but maybe 500, maybe 500, maybe even 600.
Right. But it's not going to be like 6,000 and then 60,000 and then 600,000. It's not going to go up exponentially. Viruses like this just don't cause that kind of fatality rise. And kind of his biggest point is because we have this absence of data, we really don't know. We don't have all the right data. We don't know at all if all these extreme measures of social distancing and lockdowns, we don't even know if it's going to work. We know we're going to cause harm to our whole country and the whole world with these lockdowns. And so he's saying that we're going overboard. This whole approach with no data to show that this is going to be devastating to us as far as the virus goes, and no data to show that these lockdowns are even going to help. He says, why are we doing this? We shouldn't be taking such extreme measures in the absence of such data.
And this is a professor of medicine, a professor of epidemiology. So we're not talking about somebody who's just weighing in with his economic opinion, which is what everybody seems to think now, is that Trump opening up the country again is basically choosing money over people's lives. People are picking their 401ks, I've heard, over people dying. It's not like that. Like, we've got people that work in epidemiology that are saying this is not the right way to go. No. People that are infectious disease specialists saying this is not the right way to go. And he talks about school closures, which has been a controversial measure. I looked at some data from the CDC today and some studies that talked about whether or not school closures have shown to be effective in the past. And they were studying influenza. And even that data was half and half. Some studies said yes, some studies said no. And influenza is a virus that actually affects children negatively, that you would actually see passed around a school and can have disastrous consequences. So what he says, what John says here, is he says this idea of school closures may actually backfire, because children socialize anyway, right? And if they're now back in the homes with their elderly family members, if children being home disrupts parents' ability to work, and it also diminishes the chance of developing herd immunity in the age group that is actually spared from the serious disease. And so in many different ways, he's saying this idea of school closures have not been proven to be something that would be a type of government action that would make a difference in preventing transmission necessarily. I talked about the World Health Organization and how they said not a single case was transmitted in the China outbreak data. Not a single case went from a child to an adult. It was always the other way around. So people think, oh, what's the big difference of, kids not being in school? Who's going to watch them? People have to lose their jobs to stay home to watch their children. So that is a last ditch effort. That's something you're going to want to do at the very, very last measure. Yeah. And that's one of the first things they've done. And in California, they're basically estimating that would be all the way until September, which is months and months and months and months.
Yeah. Yeah, I like, speaking of experts, this article kind of has a link. You can check another article. There's someone who's a specialist in health analytics, and he's quoted as saying, basically, the novel coronavirus is a serious threat in that it can be serious for a very small minority of people. He says we need to prepare, but not overreact. And I think that's the gist of what most people probably would agree with. I like that we're preparing, and I like that our hospital is preparing, but everything else is I feel like a significant overreaction, and that's going to again end up probably causing more harm than good, as the president is saying. He doesn't want the cure of this to be worse than the disease.
And so he also talks about flattening the curve. So we've heard this phrase, flattening the curve. And he said, flattening the curve to avoid overwhelming the health system is conceptually sound in theory. So this all makes sense in theory. But he says, yet if the health system does become overwhelmed, the majority of the extra deaths may not be due to the coronavirus, but to other common diseases and conditions such as heart attack, stroke, trauma, bleeding, things that are not adequately treated. He said, then flattening the curve may make things worse because instead of being overwhelmed during a short, acute phase, the health system will remain overwhelmed for a more protracted period. And we've heard also, as it relates to flattening the curve, I don't think this is something that people realize. It does not mean there will be less cases.
Right.
So that's one of the things people think, we're going to flatten this curve like we're going to stop some of the cases. It's literally stretching them out. You'll have the same number of people that are infected with this. And the idea is to keep it so that the hospital system's not overburdened at one time. It does not decrease. It's not going to decrease the number of cases and therefore might not decrease the number of deaths from coronavirus. It's just going to spread them out. People think everything we're doing right now is going to cut it off. It's going to stop it. The only thing it could help is the people that might have otherwise not been seen by that hospital because they're overwhelmed. But that doesn't look likely based on the data that we're seeing.
Yeah. But I think if the flattening the curve theory, if it proves correct, and we basically have slowed the spread of this virus, but you're right, it's not going to ultimately decrease how many are affected. But if we've slowed the spread through some of these, measures we're taking, and hospitals have time to prepare and have time to, get all the right equipment, then as these severe cases come in, the hospitals will be able to handle them. And I guess, like, if we had done nothing, and if this did hit hard, then hospitals would possibly already be overwhelmed with more severe cases than they can handle. So that's, I guess, that's what they were thinking when they came.
That was the theory. They were projecting.
And they might be right or wrong about it. It's hard to say.
Well, I don't know. In the conference with the president, he's sitting there going, it was a learning experience. It's been a learning experience. To me, what that translates into, we realized we didn't have to do this much. We've learned in the process, and now let's keep moving forward with kind of maybe stepping back a little bit because it's too much. Yeah. I mean, I think I originally, when I thought of flattening the curve, it seems like you're cutting a portion of it off. So you're losing all those cases you would have otherwise had,
right?
Because you see a curve,
not.
right? But and that's why I'm explaining it is because you see this like high bell curve, and then you see a lower one, and you think, look at the difference in number of cases. Yeah. But that's not how it works. You've got a short short curve that's high, and then you have a long curve that's lower, but it equals the same amount of cases. You're not losing, and it talks about that in one of these other articles. I'll quote the guy.
Yeah, but then the point is if you the problem with all this social distancing and locking down is, we said before, once you open everything up, if you just send everyone out in the world, then you could have this huge outbreak again because you didn't allow people to create, some herd immunity. And especially if none of the kids are getting any immunity to this while they're young and healthy and able to withstand this, then they could be even, reservoirs for more outbreaks of this if we're keeping them locked down for so long in the interim.
And so, as talking about the long-term locking down, he says one of the things that the bottom lines that we don't know is how long can we maintain without major consequences to the economy, society, and mental health. This is something that needs to be a big part of the conversation. And President Trump was talking about suicides and deaths that result from things like depression and suicides that come from economic loss. People are thinking you're taking the economic loss to save the lives. They don't understand that economic loss can translate into losing lives, and that that number can actually be much higher than the initial loss of lives from the virus. And you have to weigh that as a society. Not everybody gets to get saved. I mean, that's the reality of how life works. Viruses, illnesses, car accidents. There are things that happen all the time that we can't always stop somebody from dying. That's just not how nature works. Mm-hmm. We have to look at this cost benefit and say, for the handful of people that could die here, what about the hundreds of millions that are at risk of damage here? And these are difficult decisions to make, but it's just not so simple. You can't just say, well, some elderly are dying, so we've got to put the country on lockdown, and they're just going to pay your mortgage, and we'll all be fine. Like it doesn't work like that, because let's say you even got your mortgage paid. Let's say your bills were paid. The process of what's happening and the isolation associated with what's happening is going to have 100% going to have severe consequences on the mental health of millions of Americans, and that's just in our country. We've never done this before. I saw some articles shared about how people are having virtual dinners together so that they don't feel alone. And then they're starting a hashtag called Alone Together. It's like a hash. They're trying to create this, like, this is a cool thing. We can be alone, but people need to be with people. Elderly need to be with people. They're being completely isolated now. We don't know how that's going to look for them, and being away from their family members and grandparents that don't get to see their own children and their grandkids. We don't know what this is going to look like. And so he says, everything is unpredictable at this point, and it could include financial crisis, unrest, civil strife, and a meltdown of the social fabric. So these are conversations we should be having about this issue, and this should be something we're discussing. That's never one of the questions you're really hearing at any of these governor or presidential conferences. All you tend to hear at these conferences is, why aren't we doing more? This should be stricter. There was somebody out at the beach yesterday. Aren't you going to do more? I mean, it's like, you're not going to keep 330 million people inside their homes. There's absolutely no way to do it. They do not have the manpower to do it. And policing everybody to make sure they're not on some hiking trail is gotten out of control. Okay, it has gotten out of control. You have these people that are so super educated that are looking at this stuff saying, we are set up for a disastrous future if we follow this strict protocol and don't reevaluate. We need to reevaluate. We've done what we've done, but let's reevaluate what's coming next. And he said, with lockdowns that take months, he said, these consequences are unknown, and billions, not millions of lives may eventually be at stake. So he's saying billions of lives across the world are going to be at stake compared to the millions that may theoretically have been at risk for the virus. And these are the tough decisions that we have to make. And you know what? We have to look at all the sides of this before we're coming to our conclusions. And that's the thing I think most people are not doing right now, is they're not looking at more than one side. They're looking at one side, which is there are some people dying. That's all that matters. And, death is an interesting thing. It comes in lots of different forms, and it comes at different times. And death can be something that comes from economic strife. This is something that has to be considered. I read an article today that said that there were 10,000 suicides after the 2008 a real estate market crash, 10,000. That was just one portion of the economy that was faltering at that time, and there was no isolation at that time. So you think about the social isolation element combined with the economic loss, in every single area of our economy. This has never happened before. We cannot predict we are all going to be fine after this. So we should only be taking these strict measures if it is absolutely the only way, in my opinion. And if they went too far for it, let's reevaluate. Let's do it differently. Let's back off and fine tune the approach. That's how I feel about it.
Okay, why don't we hold up here? We just finished this article, and let's take a break, and we will come back with a part 4 for our coronavirus update with an exciting new article that I read that I'm very eager to share, and it has actually a lot of new things that I learned. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on the vaccine conversation, and we will see you next time.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.